My grandfather left me land on the coast. My daughter insisted it was nothing, just sign the waiver. At the land office they told me straight, it's worth millions. That's when I realized, she didn't want to help, she wanted to take it. I had been sorting through boxes in the attic, dust rising like ghosts in the beams of afternoon sunlight. The cardboard was soft from years of damp, the corners gnawed a bit by time. Some of the folders still had my grandfather's careful handwriting on the tabs, strong, deliberate strokes of ink that looked as if he'd just written them yesterday. Inside one folder, tucked between brittle deeds and yellowed receipts for things like farm equipment, I found it. A contract thicker than the rest, stamped with an old county seal from California. The paper was stiff and formal, but the words were plain enough that even I, with no training in law, could understand them. My grandfather had signed away land, but kept for himself a strip of the waterfront. It was written clearly, almost proudly, as if he wanted no mistake about it. I froze right there on the attic floor, my knees aching on the wooden boards. My fingers traced the embossed seal, the heavy ink of his signature. That bold, looping script was the same one I'd seen on birthday cards when I was a girl. I sat back, the dust swirling around me, and the weight of it sank in. My grandfather had held onto a piece of California's coastline. Not just any patch of land, but the kind that now everyone knew was worth fortunes. I thought of the ocean waves, the cliffs, the wide sky. A whole strip that he had reserved for himself and now somehow for me. I whispered aloud, almost to steady myself, "Goodness gracious." My daughter's voice came back to me then, clear as a bell. She had told me over and over, whenever I asked about some of the papers left behind, "Mom, it's legal nonsense. Just sign the waiver. Don't get yourself tangled up in this." She always said it with a smile, a little laugh, as though I were being silly for even worrying. But holding that contract in my hands, I didn't feel silly at all. I felt as though I'd stumbled on something that had been waiting for me, hidden in plain sight. My heart gave a nervous flutter, and I set the papers gently in my lap, afraid they might crumble if I held them too tightly. The attic air was thick and hot, and I could hear the faint hum of the cicadas outside. I thought about bringing the papers straight downstairs to show her. Maybe she'd finally admit it was real, not nonsense. But a hesitation kept me rooted in place. Why had she always been so quick to push the waiver into my hands? Why had she wanted me to sign without reading? I closed the folder and clutched it to my chest. My palms were damp, and I could feel the corners of the paper cutting slightly into my skin. I thought of my grandfather, how stubborn he had been, how he never let anyone push him into a corner. He'd been a man who believed in the land, in what it meant to keep a hold of something when the rest of the world wanted to take it away. Downstairs, the clock struck 4, the deep chime carrying up through the floorboards. It jolted me to my feet. I slid the folder under my arm and made my way down the narrow attic stairs, my legs shaky with every step. When I reached the kitchen, I laid the contract carefully on the table, smoothing it flat with the palm of my hand. The paper smelled faintly of old ink and salt, as though the ocean air itself had been trapped inside it all these years. For a long while I just stood there, staring. I remembered how my daughter had smiled that last time, placing the waiver in front of me. "Mom, really, it's nothing. Just a formality. Sign here and it'll be out of the way." But it hadn't felt like nothing. And now, seeing the proof, I knew it wasn't. The light outside was beginning to fade, turning the kitchen golden. The world went on as usual. Neighbors calling to one another across their yards, a dog barking somewhere down the street. But for me, everything had shifted. I had found more than just paper. I had found a key to something far bigger than I could yet imagine. And I knew, as sure as I knew my own name, that this was only the beginning. I sat at the kitchen table that night with the contract in front of me, the lamp throwing its yellow circle of light over the papers. I kept rereading the same lines. The undersigned retains rights to the coastal strip. The words didn't change. My grandfather's signature was steady, proud. But my daughter's voice still echoed in my head. Her laughter, the way she brushed it all aside. It's legal nonsense, Mom. Just sign the waiver. I wanted to believe her. She had a way of sounding so certain, so reasonable. She spoke quickly, always with that warm smile that made me think she was looking out for me. But something about the way she pressed me, almost rushing me to sign, had stayed with me. That night I made up my mind. I wasn't going to sign a thing until I knew for sure. The next morning I put on my navy skirt, the one with the pressed pleats, and buttoned my cream blouse. I wanted to look proper, serious. I tucked the folder into my old leather handbag, the one that had been through more years than I cared to count. Then I locked the house and walked down the street to catch the bus into town. The county land office was in a plain brick building near the courthouse, with a wide set of steps leading up to glass doors. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and coffee, the kind of smell that clings to government buildings everywhere. I stepped up to the counter where a young clerk in a crisp gray suit was typing on a computer. His hair was slicked back neatly, and his tie was the color of a robin's egg. He looked up at me with polite disinterest. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "Yes," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I set my handbag on the counter and pulled out the folder. "I'd like someone to look over these papers. They're from my grandfather's estate. It's about land, coastal land in California." He took the papers with a practiced motion, flipping them open. At first he skimmed quickly, his eyes moving with the rhythm of someone used to dull documents. But then he slowed. His brow furrowed. He leaned closer, tracing one finger along the seal stamped at the bottom of the page. He went quiet. Too quiet. The room seemed to hush with him. I heard the click of another clerk's keyboard somewhere behind the counter, the distant ring of a phone, but he was frozen, staring at the page. I shifted on my feet. "Is something wrong?" He didn't answer right away. He cleared his throat, glanced around as if to make sure no one else was listening, then lowered his voice. "Do you know what you have here?" My heart thudded in my chest. "It's a deed, isn't it?" "It's more than that." He tapped the seal again. "This is authentic. It's an old reservation clause. Your grandfather kept the rights. If this is still valid." He stopped, his eyes flicking back to the page. His voice dropped even lower, almost a whisper. "Do you have any idea how much this could be worth?" The words made my breath catch. Worth. He didn't mean a few $100s or even a few thousand. His tone carried weight. My hands began to tremble. I clasped them together, trying to steady myself. "I don't understand," I managed. "It's just a strip of land." "Ma'am," he said carefully, "land like this along that coastline, it's not just land. It's prime property. Developers would." He trailed off, shaking his head as if he'd said too much already. I leaned forward. "Developers would what?" He looked at me then, really looked, as though trying to measure whether I could handle the truth. Finally, he straightened, cleared his throat, and returned to a professional tone. "I'll need to make copies. We can check the registry records, see if the rights still stand." He disappeared into a back office, leaving me standing at the counter with my knees wobbling. I pressed my hand against the cool marble surface, willing myself not to faint. I thought of my daughter's insistence, her push to get me to sign. My stomach tightened. When the clerk returned, he was polite again, but his eyes betrayed something, curiosity, maybe even awe. He handed the papers back carefully, almost reverently. "These are important documents, ma'am. Hold on to them. We'll be in touch once the registry search is complete." I slipped them back into my handbag and thanked him, my voice barely above a whisper. As I walked out of the building, the sunlight seemed sharper, the world louder. The traffic roared, people bustled past me, and I felt small, carrying that folder pressed tight against my side. On the bus ride home, I stared out the window, my reflection faint in the glass. My hand still trembled in my lap. The clerk's words echoed in my mind. Do you know how much this could be worth? I didn't know the number. But I knew one thing now, this was no nonsense. And my daughter had known it too. The bus rattled me back home, and I carried the folder upstairs like it was a newborn child. I laid it on the dresser in my bedroom and covered it with a folded towel, as if that might hide it from prying eyes. But the words of the young man at the land office would not leave me. Do you know how much this could be worth? That night I hardly slept. Every creak of the house, every shadow across the ceiling kept me awake. My grandfather's script swam before my eyes, his bold, looping letters binding me to something larger than I had ever expected. By morning I knew I couldn't stay put. I needed more answers. So I gathered the papers again, straightened my blouse, and returned to the land office. My steps felt heavier than before, as if the air itself pressed against me. The same clerk was at the counter, and when he saw me, he stiffened. He straightened his tie, glanced around the room, then gave me a quick nod. Come with me, he said. He led me past the counter, down a narrow hallway into a small records room lined with shelves and humming with the soft sound of machines. He closed the door behind us, lowering his voice. I had a chance to pull the registry records last night, he said. He slid a folder across the desk toward me. Ma'am, these documents, your grandfather's reservation, it's still valid. The rights were never transferred, never waived. Legally, this land is still yours. My mouth went dry. I reached for the folder, my fingers brushing the cool paper. Inside were copies of maps, notations, official seals from the state. The words blurred for a moment before I blinked them back into focus. How much? I whispered. He hesitated, as if reluctant to say. Then he leaned forward. Ma'am, you're looking at millions. Tens of millions, depending on the size of the strip. Developers are in bidding wars for less desirable property than this. The room spun. My hands clutched the papers so tightly my knuckles whitened. And millions. He nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. You're sitting on gold. My hands trembled so badly I had to set the folder down before I tore the pages. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, the thudding of my heart. I thought of my daughter's smile, her gentle insistence, the way she had tried to put the waiver in front of me as though it were a kindness. My breath caught. A heaviness sank in my chest that had nothing to do with age. The clerk cleared his throat, trying to soften the blow of truth. You must be very careful. People would do anything for a claim like this. Do you understand? I did. I understood more in that moment than I wanted to. I gathered the papers with shaking hands and tucked them back into my bag. The young man gave me one more look, that quiet warning in his eyes, before walking me back to the main office. I stepped into the sunlight outside and felt the weight of the world pressing down on me. The bus ride home was a blur. I stared at the same streets I had ridden past the day before, but they no longer looked the same. The bakery, the gas station, the row of tired little shops, all seemed smaller, less solid. My mind was elsewhere, racing ahead, circling around one question. Who could I trust? When I opened my front door, the house greeted me with its usual quiet creaks, the smell of lavender polish from the day before. I set the bag on the kitchen table and sat heavily in my chair. I poured myself a glass of water, but my hands shook so badly the rim rattled against the glass. Millions. I whispered the word aloud just to hear it. It felt unreal, like a word from someone else's life. Then from the living room I heard it, my daughter's voice. Light, cheerful but hurried. She was on the telephone. I froze, my hand still on the glass. I moved quietly, inching toward the doorway until I could hear her clearly. Yes, she was saying. I almost got her to sign. Just a little more, and then the property is ours. The words hit me like a slap. My knees weakened and I gripped the wall for balance. Ours. Not hers. Not mine. Ours. She was not speaking for me. She was speaking against me. My heart sank so heavily I thought it might never rise again. I stayed there, hidden, listening to her laughter drift across the room. The sound of betrayal in its purest form. My own daughter. My flesh and blood. The papers in my handbag suddenly felt like both a shield and a target. I pressed the bag closer to me and tiptoed back into the kitchen, silent as a shadow. In that moment, one thing was certain. I could no longer pretend this was just a misunderstanding. This was a fight. I sat in the kitchen, clutching the handbag to my chest as if it were the only thing keeping me steady. My daughter's voice carried from the living room, light and cheerful, but it sliced through me like glass. "Yes," she said, her tone smooth, almost playful. I almost got her to sign. "After that, the property is ours." The words were plain, unadorned, cruel in their simplicity. My legs shook under the table. For a moment I couldn't breathe. I wanted to storm into the room, demand answers, look her in the eye and shout, "How dare you?" But I stayed rooted, hidden, listening as though my survival depended on it. Her laugh followed, quick and careless, the same laugh she'd given me when she'd called it legal nonsense. Now I knew that laugh was the mask she wore when she thought she had me fooled. She hung up after a few more hushed words, the receiver clicking back into place. The silence in the house after that was deafening. I didn't move. I sat there, staring at the patterns in the tablecloth, my pulse thudding in my throat. My daughter, my only child, the one I had carried, raised, and trusted, had betrayed me. When I finally stood, my knees ached and wobbled. I pressed a hand to the wall as I made my way back to the bedroom. The folder of documents, still warm from where I'd tucked them in my bag, went into the bottom drawer of my dresser, beneath a stack of old blankets. I closed the drawer gently like a coffin lid. I stayed in my room for the rest of the afternoon. The minutes stretched, heavy and still, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the nightstand. Each tick seemed louder than the last, marking the slow death of the trust one had once held. By evening, I heard her footsteps coming down the hall. Light, deliberate. She tapped softly on the door before pushing it open, her smile already fixed in place. "Mom," she said, her voice honey-sweet. "I brought you something to sign." She held out a folder, new papers, fresh ink, neat staples glinting in the light. Her eyes didn't meet mine right away. Instead, she set the folder on my nightstand as if it were just another piece of mail. "It's just a formality," she added with a shrug, her lips curling into that familiar smile. "Nothing to worry about." I looked at the folder, then at her. The same daughter who used to run barefoot in the yard, who used to curl against me on stormy nights. And yet now, standing there, she was a stranger. She must have sensed my hesitation because she reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. "You trust me, don't you?" she said, her eyes shining with practiced warmth. I managed a small nod, but inside my heart was splintering. She left the folder on the nightstand and kissed my forehead lightly before leaving the room. Her perfume lingered in the air long after her footsteps faded down the hall. I stared at the papers until the shadows grew long and the room went dark. My hands itched to tear them in half, to march into the living room and fling the pieces at her feet. But I didn't. I lay awake most of the night, staring at the ceiling. Each time I closed my eyes, I heard her voice again. "The property is ours." By morning, I had made my decision. I would not confront her, not yet. She thought me gullible, soft, too old to understand the weight of what she was doing. Let her think that. But I would not sign. I slid the folder she had given me under a stack of magazines out of sight. And then, quietly, I pulled the old phone book from the hall drawer. My finger traced down the listings until I found what I was looking for. Attorneys, real estate, land disputes. I circled one name in particular, a firm I remembered hearing about from a neighbor. I wrote down the number on a scrap of paper and tucked it into my handbag, right next to my grandfather's contract. That afternoon, when my daughter went out, I dialed the number. My voice shook as I explained what I had found, what I had been asked to sign. The man on the other end listened quietly, then told me to bring everything to his office. When I hung up the phone, I sat very still, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the faint rustle of the curtains in the breeze. I wasn't alone anymore. And though my daughter believed she had me cornered, I was already preparing my way out. The betrayal had cut deep, yes, but it had also lit a fire in me I thought was long gone. This wasn't just about paper. It was about blood, trust, and the land my grandfather had guarded so carefully. And I would not let it go. The next evening, the air in the house felt thick, like it was holding its breath. I sat in my armchair with my knitting resting useless in my lap, waiting. I knew she'd come. She always came when she wanted something signed. Right on cue, the front door opened. Her heels clicked against the floor as she walked in, her smile already plastered in place like a mask she'd been wearing all day. She carried a neat folder, thinner than the one before, but I knew better now. "Mom," she said softly, almost too softly, "I have something for you." Her tone was the same she'd used when she was a little girl, asking for sweets before supper. Sweet, practiced, but with that edge of urgency underneath. She laid the folder gently on the coffee table, sliding it toward me as if it were a gift. "It's just a formality," she said, her lips curling into that familiar smile. "Nothing complicated. Just a little signature, that's all." I leaned forward slowly, my eyes on her instead of the papers. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. There was something sharp behind them, something I'd only just begun to see. I touched the folder lightly with my fingers, not opening it, just feeling the cool press of the paper. "Formality," I repeated. She nodded eagerly, sitting down beside me on the couch, her hand brushing mine in that coaxing way she always used. "Yes, Mom. Just something to make things easier. For both of us." I looked at her hand, then at her face. I remembered the voice I had heard on the phone the day before, that cold certainty. "After that, the property is ours." It was a trap. I could see it as clear as day. But I smiled. A small, tight smile that gave nothing away. "I see," I said. She relaxed, her shoulders dropping slightly as she took my smile for agreement. She reached for the pen on the table and placed it gently in my hand. My fingers curled around it. The weight of the pen felt heavier than it should have, like the whole world was balanced on its tip. I opened the folder slowly, my eyes scanning the first page. Legal terms sprawled across the lines, thick and suffocating. But even with my tired eyes, I could catch the words that mattered. Waiver, release, relinquish. She leaned closer, her perfume filling my nose. "Right there," she whispered, tapping the bottom of the page. "Just sign there, Mom. It's really nothing." Her smile trembled just slightly. She wanted it too badly. I let my eyes linger on the page. Then I set the pen down carefully on the table. "I'll need to read it through," I said, my voice calm even. For the briefest moment, her mask slipped. Her eyes flashed sharp as knives. Then she laughed lightly, covering it with a shake of her head. "Of course, Mom. Take your time. No rush." She stood, smoothing her skirt, her smile snapping back into place. "I'll just leave it here for you then. You can look it over tonight. Tomorrow we'll take care of it." She gave me a kiss on the cheek before gliding out of the room, her heels clicking away. The front door closed and the silence pressed in. I sat very still, staring at the folder on the table. The words from the clerk echoed in my mind. "Do you know how much this could be worth? People would do anything for a claim like this." My daughter wanted me to believe she was helping me, protecting me. But now I saw the truth. This wasn't about me. It was about her. I reached for the folder again, this time flipping through every page slowly, my finger tracing each line. Each page was dressed up in legal language, but at the heart of it, the meaning was simple. I would be giving everything away. I closed the folder with a snap, slid it under the cushion of my chair and sat back. Tomorrow, I told myself. Tomorrow I would call the lawyer again. But tonight, I would let her believe I was still the same mother who trusted her blindly. The clock ticked in the quiet room, steady and patient. I folded my hands in my lap and let the silence settle over me. She thought she had me cornered. She thought her smile was still enough to fool me. But I had lived too many years, seen too many faces to mistake greed for love. And I would not fall into her trap. Not this time. That night I hardly touched my supper. The stew I'd left simmering on the stove went cold, untouched in its pot. I sat in the living room, the formality folder hidden under the cushion, and thought of my grandfather. I could almost see him, broad-shouldered, with that stubborn set to his jaw. He had fought for every inch of land he ever owned. He would never have let anyone trick him out of it. By morning I knew what I had to do. I waited until my daughter left for errands. She always announced her trips with the jingle of her keys and a bright, "I'll be back later, Mom." I stood by the window watching her car pull out of the driveway, the sound of gravel crunching under the tires. Only when the street was quiet again did I pick up the phone. The lawyer's office was downtown, a tall glass building that looked too modern for my taste, but I wasn't there for comfort. I carried my handbag with both folders inside, my grandfather's contract and the waiver my daughter had left for me. My palms were sweaty, but my steps were steady. The receptionist, a young woman with sharp nails and a sharper smile, led me into a corner office where a man in a dark suit stood to greet me. He was younger than I expected, maybe in his 40s, but his handshake was firm and his eyes were steady. "Mrs. Evans," he said. I nodded, setting my bag on the chair. "Please call me Margaret." "All right, Margaret. Let's take a look." I pulled out my grandfather's contract first. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, scanned the first page, then flipped carefully through each section. His eyebrows lifted slightly, and he gave a small whistle. "Well," he said, leaning back in his chair, "this is quite something. This is no ordinary deed. Your grandfather reserved rights to a strip of California coastline. And from the language here," he tapped a line with his pen, "he did it in perpetuity. That means unless you or your heirs willingly relinquish those rights, they remain yours. No expiration." I clasped my hands tightly in my lap. "And does that mean it's still mine?" He nodded. "Yes, it's valid. And Mrs. Evans, Margaret, this land is not just valuable. It's priceless. Developers are scrambling for every acre of the resort zone. With this contract, you're sitting on millions." The word landed heavy in the room, thicker than air. Millions. My breath caught and I felt the heat rising to my cheeks. I thought of the clerk whispering at the land office, and now this lawyer speaking it plainly. And this. I slid the second folder across the desk, the one my daughter had left. "She asked me to sign this." The lawyer opened it, read the first page, then flipped through the rest with a practiced eye. His mouth tightened. "This is a release of rights," he said flatly. "If you sign this, you give everything away. All claims, all ownership. It's drafted so you'd have no recourse. Whoever put this in front of you wanted the land in their own name, free and clear." My throat ached. She told me it was a formality. He set the folder down carefully, meeting my eyes. "It's not a formality. It's a trap." I pressed my hand to my chest, feeling the thudding of my heart. The lawyer leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "Margaret, listen to me. Do not sign anything. Not a waiver, not a release, not even a receipt unless I've reviewed it. You hold a golden document. People will try to pressure you, maybe even frighten you. But you have the upper hand." I nodded slowly, my eyes stinging with unshed tears. Relief and dread tangled inside me. "I'll represent you," he continued. We'll make sure this land is secured in your name. And when the time comes to sell or lease if you prefer, we'll do it on your terms, not anyone else's." I whispered a thank you, though the words felt small compared to what I felt inside. When I left the office, the city seemed louder than ever. The honk of car horns, the chatter of people on the sidewalks, the smell of exhaust fumes. All of it pressed in around me. But I held my bag close, the weight of my grandfather's papers heavier now with meaning. On the bus ride home, I stared out the window watching the buildings slide past. My daughter thought she had outsmarted me, thought I would sign without question. But I had something stronger than her schemes: the truth. When I stepped into the quiet of my house, I set the bag down on the table and sat for a long moment, letting the silence settle. My lawyer's words replayed in my head. "Don't sign anything. You hold a golden document." For the first time in days, I let out a deep breath. I wasn't powerless. But then, as the clock ticked toward evening, I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway, the slam of a car door, the jingle of keys. She was back, and I knew my silence would be my shield. I smoothed the tablecloth with my trembling hands and waited, ready to let her believe her trap was still in place, because she had no idea that I had already found my way out. The morning after my visit to the lawyer, I rose early. I brewed a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the steam rising in soft curls while I stared at the folded towel that hid my grandfather's papers. My lawyer's words rang clear as a bell. "Don't sign anything. You hold a golden document." I traced the rim of my mug with a shaky finger. I wanted to believe those words made me safe. But deep down, I knew safety wasn't what my daughter was after. She wanted control. By 10 o'clock, I heard the crunch of tires on the driveway. I looked out the window expecting her car. But it wasn't just hers. A sleek black sedan pulled in behind her, followed by a silver SUV. Doors opened and out stepped strangers, men in dark suits, a woman with a leather briefcase, another with a rolled-up set of maps under her arm. My breath caught. Within minutes, they were in my living room, spreading their papers across the coffee table like soldiers laying out a battle plan. They spoke in quick voices, throwing around words I only half understood. Resort zone, parcels, valuations, permits. And my daughter? She stood among them, smiling, as if she were the hostess of some grand meeting. "Mom," she said brightly, "these are friends of mine. Developers. They're just here to show us some options." Options. The word was sweetened, but I could taste the bitterness underneath. I lowered myself into my armchair, my hands folded tightly in my lap. I said nothing. The woman with the briefcase pulled out glossy blueprints and spread them wide across the table. They showed neat rows of buildings, little pools shaped like teardrops, winding driveways curling down toward the ocean. And right there, in thick black ink, I recognized the outline of the strip of coastline my grandfather had claimed. "This area here," the woman said, tapping the page, "would be prime for a beachfront resort. The value alone." She paused, glancing at my daughter, who gave a quick nod. "Well, it speaks for itself." One of the men chuckled, a low, satisfied sound. "We've been waiting for this piece of land to come into play. Didn't think we'd get so lucky." Their voices blurred together after that. I heard numbers, millions, tens of millions. I heard phrases like exclusive rights, premium location, long-term investment. All the while I sat in silence, my face calm, my heart pounding so hard I thought they might hear it. I kept my lawyer's warning tucked in my mind. "Don't sign anything." I glanced at my daughter. She was radiant in their company, glowing with the kind of excitement I had once seen when she was a little girl opening a birthday present. Only now, the gift she wanted wasn't hers to open. One of the men turned to me at last. "Ma'am," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "if you sign today, we can begin the process immediately. You'll be well taken care of, I assure you." The room seemed to lean toward me, every face expectant, every hand ready to shove a pen my way. But I simply smiled politely and said, "I'll need some time to think." A flicker of impatience crossed the man's face. He opened his mouth to press further, but my daughter cut in quickly, her smile wide and reassuring. "Of course, Mom. Take your time. They just wanted to show you the possibilities." Possibilities? The meeting dragged on another hour. They spoke over my head, as if I were already irrelevant. They scribbled notes, shuffled maps, whispered numbers back and forth. And I sat, nodding faintly now and then, my lips pressed tight to keep from betraying myself. When at last they gathered their things, rolling up the blueprints and snapping their briefcases shut, my daughter walked them to the door like a perfect hostess. "Thank you again," she said, her voice bright. "We'll be in touch soon." When the last car pulled away, the house fell silent. My daughter turned back to me, her eyes gleaming. "Well, Mom," she said, her voice sharp now, stripped of its sweetness. "You saw the numbers. You'd be foolish not to take this deal." I looked at her, at the woman she had become, and felt a cold ache in my chest. Once she had come home with scraped knees and tear-streaked cheeks, and I had kissed them better. Now she stood before me, calculating, impatient, ready to strip me of the one legacy my grandfather had left. But I said nothing. I only nodded, as if I were still the trusting mother she believed me to be. She mistook my silence for surrender. "Good," she said briskly. "I'll bring the papers tomorrow." I waited until she left, the sound of her car fading into the distance, before I allowed my hands to shake. I pressed them flat against the table, my breath ragged. The lawyer's words echoed again. "You hold a golden document. Don't sign anything." I had not signed. Not yet. But the war had come into my living room. And I knew this was only the beginning. The house had barely settled from the weight of their footsteps when the next blow landed. I thought I'd bought myself some time with my silence, but my daughter wasn't finished. She was never finished. The next afternoon I was sipping tea at the kitchen table, the lace curtain pulled back so I could watch the street. The sunlight caught the dust in the air, turning it gold. For a moment it almost felt peaceful. Then the phone rang. It was my lawyer. His voice was calm, but there was a tightness beneath it. "Margaret," he said, "I need you to listen carefully. Your daughter has filed a petition for guardianship." My stomach dropped. "Guardianship? What do you mean?" "It means," he said slowly, "she's claiming you're no longer competent to make decisions for yourself. If the court approves, she will control your assets, including the land." The tea in my hand trembled so badly I had to set the cup down. The porcelain clinked against the saucer. She told them I can't decide for myself? "Yes," he replied. "She's alleging forgetfulness, confusion. It's a common tactic in cases like this. They'll argue you're too old to handle complex matters. If they succeed, you'll have no legal say in what happens to your property." For a moment I couldn't breathe. The betrayal was a weight pressing against my chest. My own daughter trying to erase me while I was still alive. "Don't panic," he added quickly. "We'll fight this. But you must be very careful. From now on, every conversation, every piece of paper, let me see it first. Do not give her anything." When I hung up the phone, the silence of the house pressed down on me like never before. I looked around at the familiar walls, the pictures of birthdays and graduations still hanging in their frames, and felt like a stranger in my own home. That evening she arrived. No folder this time, no smile. Just her standing in my doorway, her arms crossed. "Mom," she said, her tone clipped, businesslike. "I can't watch you get manipulated anymore. You're too old to understand what's going on. I filed for guardianship. It's for your own good." Her words struck like ice. For your own good. That old, tired phrase used when someone takes your choices away. I looked at her, steadying myself. "I'm not helpless." She gave a thin laugh. Mom, you can barely keep track of your bills. You forget things all the time. This land is too big for you to handle. You'll thank me later. I stayed silent, my lawyer's warning echoing in my head. Don't argue. Don't sign. Let them underestimate you. She mistook my silence for weakness. She leaned forward, her voice softening as if speaking to a child. You don't need to worry about any of this anymore. I'll take care of everything. You can rest. Rest. Another word that meant step aside. When she finally left, slamming the door behind her, I sat in the stillness of the living room, my heart pounding. My hands were trembling, but my mind was clear. That night, I pulled out a box from under my bed. Inside were my grandfather's old letters, yellowed envelopes, his script bold and unwavering. There were notes he'd written to the county, correspondence with surveyors, even a faded photograph of him standing on the cliffside with the ocean stretching out behind him. I spread them across the bed like pieces of a puzzle. Each one was proof not just of ownership but of intent. My grandfather hadn't simply stumbled into that land. He had fought for it, defended it, and preserved it for the future. And now that future was me. I stayed awake late into the night, sorting and stacking the papers. By the time dawn light filtered through the curtains, I had a neat pile of evidence, ready for my lawyer. My daughter thought she could silence me with guardianship papers. She thought she could paint me as forgetful, frail, unfit. But I had my grandfather's voice in ink. I had the truth, and I was ready to fight. The morning after she told me about the guardianship, I woke with a fire in my chest. Sleep had been thin, broken by the same thoughts circling through my mind. She thinks she can erase me while I'm still alive. I dressed carefully that day, pulling on a plain gray skirt and a cardigan my husband once said made me look steady as a church bell. I needed steadiness now. At the kitchen table, I spread out everything I had collected, my grandfather's letters, his notes, his photographs. The papers smelled of dust and salt air, of years spent in drawers and trunks, but they felt alive in my hands. One letter in particular caught my eye. My grandfather's handwriting was bold, his words written to a county clerk in 1939. I will not part with the coastal strip. It is mine by right, and I will keep it for my children, and their children after them. I traced the line with my finger, my throat tightening. Children, grandchildren, that meant me. It meant that the right was still alive, still binding. By noon, I had packed everything into a large envelope. When my lawyer saw it later that day, his eyes lit up. "This is gold," he said, holding the letter to the light. Photographs, original correspondence, all dated and sealed. They prove continuity of claim. This is exactly what we need. Will it be enough? I asked. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. It should be. But be prepared, your daughter won't back down. She's already filed her petition. It will go before a judge. The word judge made my stomach twist. I had never been in a courtroom except for jury duty years ago. The thought of standing there, accused of being incompetent by my own flesh and blood, made my knees ache just imagining it. But I nodded. Then I'll be ready. That evening, I sat in my living room, the envelope of evidence beside me on the table. My daughter came by, unannounced as usual, her smile thin and sharp. "Mom," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "You've been under so much stress. It's showing. Don't you see? Guardianship is for your protection." I kept my voice steady. "I don't need protecting." Her smile faltered just a fraction. Then she shrugged, adjusting the strap of her purse. "The court will decide. I'm only doing what's best for you." She turned to leave, but before the door shut, I said, "I found grandfather's letters. His notes. His photographs. They prove everything." The pause at the door was brief, but I saw her shoulders stiffen. She didn't turn back. She simply left, the door clicking shut behind her. I sat there, the silence humming around me, my heart pounding. She had heard me. She knew I was ready. The days leading up to the hearing were heavy with tension. Each morning I brewed coffee, ate my toast, and packed and repacked the envelope as if the act itself would make me stronger. My lawyer called regularly, his voice calm but firm, reminding me, "Stay quiet. Don't lose your temper. Let the documents speak." But at night, when the house was still, my thoughts were not calm. They circled like restless birds. I remembered birthdays I had planned for her. The cake with pink frosting shaped like roses. The trips to the shore where she had squealed at the waves. I remembered her laughter as a girl, high and sweet, before ambition had sharpened it. And now she was ready to stand in front of a judge and strip me of my name, my rights, my inheritance. The night before the hearing, I laid everything out on the table once more. The letters, the photographs, the contract with the bold county seal. Each piece was a stone in the wall I was building against her lies. I pressed my hand flat against the stack, closing my eyes. "Grandfather," I whispered, "I will not let you down." When the morning came, I dressed in my best navy coat, the one I'd saved for funerals and church. My lawyer met me at the courthouse steps. He looked sharp, steady, the kind of man who could speak for me when my voice shook. Inside, the walls were high, the air thick with formality. My daughter was already there, seated with her attorney, her face painted with concern, her hands folded demurely in her lap. She looked like a picture of devotion, the kind of daughter anyone would believe. But I knew the truth. When the bailiff called the case, I stood slowly, my envelope clutched tightly in my hands. My daughter rose too, brushing her skirt smooth, her eyes flicking toward me with a gleam of triumph. The judge looked at us both, then down at the file in front of him. "This matter concerns a petition for guardianship over Margaret Evans," he said. My daughter's lawyer stood first, his voice smooth and practiced. "Your Honor, my client only seeks to protect her mother, who is showing signs of confusion and forgetfulness. This involves substantial property, and it is in everyone's best interest to place decision-making in responsible hands." The words stung, but I kept my chin up. Then my lawyer rose, calm but firm. "Your Honor, we have documentation proving Mrs. Evans is fully capable of managing her affairs. In fact, we have evidence not only of her competence, but of the enormous value of the property in question. Evidence her daughter attempted to conceal." The judge raised his eyebrows. "Proceed." I clutched the envelope tighter. The moment had come. Everything, the land, the betrayal, the fight for my own name, was about to unfold here, in the quiet wait of a courtroom. The courtroom was cold, though the day outside was warm. I sat with my hands folded over the envelope on my lap, my fingers stiff, my heart beating hard enough to make me dizzy. My daughter sat across the aisle, her hair perfectly set, her expression a portrait of sorrow. She looked like a woman carrying the weight of a difficult duty. "Your Honor," her lawyer said, his voice smooth as silk, "my client only wishes to protect her aging mother. Mrs. Evans has been showing increasing signs of confusion, misplacing documents, repeating herself. This property dispute is simply too complex for her. My client fears she will be taken advantage of." The words rolled over me like a tide, each one meant to wash me away. I kept my face steady, but inside my stomach twisted. Then my daughter rose. Her voice trembled just enough to sound rehearsed but convincing. "I only want to protect my mom," she said, her eyes glistening. She glanced at me, as if she hoped to see me crumble. "She's always been there for me, but now it's my turn. I can't stand by and watch her get lost in something she doesn't understand." She dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. A show, but a well-crafted one. Some in the gallery shifted, murmuring softly. My lawyer stood next. He carried my envelope of papers like a shield. His voice was steady, with no tremor, no false pity. "Your Honor, the petitioner claims confusion. Yet the only confusion seems to be in her own motives. He laid the first letter on the judge's bench. My grandfather's handwriting, bold and stubborn, stared up at all of us. This is a 1939 letter from the respondent's grandfather, explicitly reserving rights to the coastal strip. We also submit photographs, maps, and correspondence spanning decades. These rights are legitimate and they remain intact today. He placed each piece gently before the judge, building the wall I had spent weeks gathering. Then he slid forward the folder my daughter had tried to trick me into signing. "This," he said firmly, "is a release document. If Mrs. Evans had signed, she would have unknowingly relinquished millions of dollars in property rights. The petitioner presented it to her as a formality. We submit that this was a calculated act of deception." The judge's gaze shifted to my daughter. She looked startled for a heartbeat, then lowered her eyes, her hand tightening around the handkerchief. "And finally," my lawyer said, his voice ringing out, "we present documentation from developers. Plans already drawn, maps already made. Plans that include Mrs. Evans' land without her consent. The petitioner would see her own mother erased for profit. That is the truth." He stepped back, leaving the papers in the judge's hands. The courtroom went still. The only sound was the rustle of papers as the judge turned them over, one by one. My grandfather's words, my photographs, the maps with black ink marking the coastline. He looked at me, then at my daughter. "Mrs. Evans," he said at last, his voice even but heavy, "you've heard the claims against you. Do you wish to speak?" My knees trembled as I rose. I pressed my hand to the bench for support, then lifted my chin. "I may be old," I said, my voice soft but steady, "but I am not a fool. My grandfather left that land for his family, for me. I have lived my life by his words and I know what they mean. I have not forgotten. I am not confused. What I am," I paused, my eyes falling on my daughter, "is betrayed. By my own blood." The words sat heavy in the air. I lowered myself back into my seat, my chest tight, but my heart lighter for having spoken them. The judge looked between us one more time. My daughter's face was pale now, the tears forgotten. Her mask had cracked. "Everything," the judge said firmly, "will be decided here and now." The gavel struck once, sharp and final. And I knew the tide had turned. The courtroom held its breath as the judge shuffled the papers one last time. My daughter sat stiff-backed, her lawyer whispering furiously into her ear. I clasped my hands in my lap, praying quietly to myself, though my prayers were less about victory and more about survival. At last, the judge set the papers down. His voice was firm, measured. "The petition for guardianship is denied. Mrs. Evans has demonstrated full competence in managing her affairs. The evidence presented confirms her clear understanding of her property rights. Case dismissed." The gavel struck again, sharp as thunder. Relief poured through me so quickly I nearly sagged in my chair. My daughter's face blanched. For the first time, she looked less like a woman in control, and more like a child who dropped her mask. When court adjourned, I gathered my papers carefully, sliding them back into their envelope. My lawyer gave my shoulder a reassuring pat. "You did well," he murmured. "This isn't over, but you're standing tall." I nodded, though my legs trembled beneath me as we left the courtroom. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea cooling beside me. The clock ticked steady as ever, while I replayed the day in my mind. The judge's words were a bomb, but I knew they weren't the end. I had won the round, but the war was still unfolding. The phone began ringing the very next morning. Developers. Their voices were smooth, practiced, dripping with honey. They'd read the court filings. They knew the land was real, the claim secure. "Mrs. Evans, we'd like to make an offer. You won't find a better deal. Prime location, we can close quickly." The numbers they tossed into the air were dizzying. More money than I had ever dreamed of in all my years. Tens of millions, some said. I listened, my lips pressed tight, then told each one the same thing. I'll think about it. But I knew deep down that money was not the heart of this. By afternoon, my daughter arrived. She didn't knock, just walked in with that brittle smile. She set her purse on the table and leaned against the chair across from me. "Mom," she said, her voice soft, almost pleading. "I was only trying to help. You know that, don't you?" I looked at her, saying nothing. She sighed, shifting tactics. "Look, maybe I went too far. But we both know this is too much for one person. The developers are circling. They'll eat you alive. You need me. We can share the responsibility and the profits. Just let me help." The word share tasted sour coming from her lips. I thought of the phone call I'd overheard, the laughter. The property is ours. Share was just another mask. I folded my hands on the table. "No." Her smile faltered. "No. No. The land is mine. Grandfather left it for me. Not you." Her face hardened, the warmth draining away. For a moment I saw the stranger she had become, the one who could lie, scheme, even betray blood without blinking. "You'll regret this," she said flatly, snatching her purse from the chair. The door slammed as she left. The sound echoed through the house, rattling the picture frames on the wall. I sat for a long while in the silence that followed, my breath steadying. The relief of the judge's ruling was still in me, but so was the sting of her words. Later that evening I called my lawyer again. "They're coming at me from all sides," I said quietly. "Developers. My daughter. Everyone wants a piece." He answered calmly, the way he always did. "That's because you hold something rare. Don't let pressure make your choices. When you're ready, we'll find a deal on your terms. Until then, don't sign a thing." I thanked him, hung up, and sat back in my chair. The night stretched long and quiet, the house creaking softly around me. I thought of my grandfather again, of his bold script, his stubborn words. He hadn't bent for anyone. Neither would I. The judge had given me my voice back. But now I would have to decide what to do with it. The days after the court ruling passed in a blur of phone calls, letters, and quiet visits from men in expensive suits. They all wanted the same thing, my strip of coastline. They spoke with eager voices, flashing contracts, promising numbers that seemed impossible. I listened politely, poured tea I never drank, and let them talk themselves breathless. Then I told each one the same thing. "I'll think about it." But my thinking wasn't about money. Not anymore. One evening, I took the old box of my grandfather's papers out to the porch. The sun was sinking low, turning the sky a deep orange. I spread the letters and photographs across the wooden table, letting the sea breeze ruffle their edges. My grandfather's stern eyes looked back at me from one faded picture. His boots planted firmly in the sand, the ocean crashing behind him. I whispered, "You didn't fight for this just so it could be bulldozed into swimming pools." And in that moment I knew what I had to do. The next morning I asked my lawyer to meet me at his office. I wore my best navy coat again, the one I'd worn to court, because decisions like this deserved dignity. He poured us both coffee and waited as I explained. "I don't want to sell to her people," I said, my voice steady, "or anyone like them. I won't see that coastline turned into glass towers and asphalt. But if I can find someone who will preserve it, at least part of it, I'll make a deal." He studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "That's possible. It won't be the highest bidder, but it can be done." "I don't care about the highest," I said firmly. "I care about what's left standing when I'm gone." And so he set to work. Weeks later, I sat in a different office, facing representatives from a company I hadn't expected. Conservation developers, they called themselves. They wanted resorts, yes, but they also wanted preservation. A balance. They promised to keep a wide stretch of the coastline untouched, To build walking trails and gardens instead of hotels on every inch. They spoke not only of profit but of legacy. When they slid their offer across the table, my lawyer's eyebrows lifted. The sum was staggering, enough to secure me for the rest of my days and then some. Millions as promised. But more than that, their plan gave me peace. I signed the deal with a steady hand. Not with my daughter's people. Not with her schemes. With my own choice, my own voice. When I came home that night, the house was quiet. I made myself a small supper, just soup and bread, and sat at the kitchen table. I stared at the signed contract in my bag and let the truth sink in. It was done. I had secured my future, and I had honored my grandfather's wish. The next day my daughter arrived. She didn't knock, she never did. Her eyes were sharp, hopeful, as if she still believed she could sway me. "Well?" she asked, setting her purse on the table. "Have you decided? I can bring my people tomorrow. We can finalize." I looked at her, really looked at her. For a moment I saw the little girl she once was, the one who held my hand when crossing the street, who begged me to braid her hair before school. Then that image faded, replaced by the woman in front of me, hungry-eyed, impatient. "I've already signed," I said softly. Her face brightened for a fraction of a second before I added, "Not with you. With another company. One that agreed to leave part of the land untouched." The brightness vanished. Her lips parted, then pressed tight. "You what?" I nodded. "It's done. And there's nothing left for you to take." For the first time she looked truly at a loss. Her eyes darted. Her hands fidgeted with the strap of her purse. Finally, she let out a bitter laugh. "You've ruined everything." "No," I said quietly. "I've saved something." She snatched up her purse and stormed out, the door slamming so hard the window rattled in its frame. I sat in the silence that followed, my hands folded calmly in my lap. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt something deeper, relief and sorrow. Because the truth was plain. I had secured millions, yes. I had preserved a part of the land, yes. But my daughter and I, what we once were, was gone. Later that night I took a walk in the garden, the cool air wrapping around me. The stars were sharp above, the kind of night sky my grandfather must have seen when he stood on that coastline decades ago. I thought of him, of his stubbornness, his pride, his love of the land. I thought of myself still standing, still fighting. And I thought of my daughter, who had turned into a stranger before my eyes. The most valuable thing, I realized then, was not the land, not even the money. It was the simple truth I had learned too late. Never let your family turn into strangers. And though I had lost her, I had kept my name, my dignity, and my grandfather's legacy intact. That, I decided, was victory enough. My dears, if in this story you saw yourselves, be sure to write about it in the comments. I would be very interested to read it. Thank you.